All right, let's start with a question. What if everything you thought about your mind, your thoughts, emotions, and even your sense of self was just the tip of the iceberg? What if consciousness isn't something your brain generates, but something far deeper, woven into the very fabric of the universe? That's the idea behind the quantum mind. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll never look at reality the same way again. So here's where things get real. In science, there's this massive, glaring problem called the hard problem of consciousness. Basically, we know a lot about how the brain works, neurons firing, electrical signals, all that, but we have no idea why any of it feels like something. Like, why don't we just operate like robots without any awareness? Why do we have this mysterious thing called consciousness? That's where quantum mechanics comes in. Quantum theory is the science of the super small atoms, particles, and the bizarre rules they follow. And some researchers, like David Pearce, believe consciousness might not just be a byproduct of our brain's wiring. Instead, it could be linked to quantum processes. Think about it, your brain isn't just a complex machine, it's a quantum machine. That unity you feel in your thoughts, where all your senses and emotions come together as one cohesive experience, might be thanks to quantum binding. It's like your brain is syncing up billions of neurons through a process that classical physics can't explain. Wild, right? Here's something that'll blow your mind further. Pearce proposes that consciousness might not be limited to humans or even animals.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
It could be a fundamental feature of reality itself. That means particles, fields, and even the universe might have some basic level of awareness. It's not saying that an electron has thoughts, but maybe it has a kind of interior quality. If that's true, then you and I are just highly complex expressions of a consciousness that's everywhere. So here's my first question for you. If consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, does that mean the universe itself is alive? Is reality experiencing itself through you? And before you start thinking this is just sci-fi nonsense, consider this: quantum physics is already full of stuff we don't understand. Particles can exist in two places at once, communicate faster than the speed of light, and behave differently just because you're watching them. So why not consciousness? Pearce and others believe that if we dig deep enough down to the level of quantum fields, we'll find that consciousness is the fire in the equations, the intrinsic nature of reality. Now, here's where things start getting practical. If consciousness is tied to quantum processes, what happens when we mess with those? What if we could engineer the brain to sync up its quantum states perfectly? Some researchers think this could unlock levels of awareness, intelligence, and happiness that we can't even imagine now. Imagine a world where mental illness is impossible, where pain and suffering are obsolete, and where your mind feels like it's firing on all cylinders every second of your life. Sounds like science fiction, right? But the technology to manipulate the brain at this level is closer than you think. Of course, this idea raises some uncomfortable questions. For one, if consciousness is everywhere, does that mean we have an ethical obligation to everything, not just humans and animals, but even the particles that make up the environment? And two, if we can engineer perfect consciousness, will we still be human? Or will we become something else entirely? All right, so now that we've talked about consciousness, let's get into the next big idea: transhumanism. This isn't just about cool gadgets or uploading your brain to the cloud. It's about fundamentally transforming what it means to be human, rewriting the genetic and technological codes that define our existence. And honestly, this might be the most important conversation of our time. Here's the deal: humans are amazing, but we're also kind of a mess. Evolution didn't design us to be happy, fulfilled, or even healthy. It designed us to survive and reproduce. That's why we're stuck with all these glitches in our mental and emotional programming: jealousy, anxiety, depression, even chronic pain. These things were useful for survival back when we were running from predators or competing for mates, but in the modern world, they're just holding us back. David Pearce argues that we don't have to accept this. Thanks to advances in biotechnology, we're now at the point where we can start editing the genetic code that shapes our minds and bodies. Imagine a future where we can turn down the volume on pain, anxiety, and stress, and turn up the settings for happiness, creativity, and love. Sound too good to be true? It's not. Scientists have already identified genes that influence mood, pain sensitivity, and even our baseline level of happiness. And with tools like CRISPR, we're starting to figure out how to tweak them. Here's a practical example. There's a gene called SCN9A that controls pain sensitivity. Some people are born with a mutation that makes them completely resistant to pain. Sounds amazing, right? But there's a catch: they also can't sense when they're injured, which can be dangerous. The solution? Instead of turning off pain entirely, we could adjust it so that it still warns us about danger, but doesn't make us suffer. Now apply that same principle to every negative emotion. What if you could feel sadness without despair, stress without burnout, anger without hatred? The possibilities are endless. But here's the big question: should we do it? Some people argue that suffering is an essential part of life, that it helps us grow, appreciate the good times, and stay motivated. But Pearce has a counter-argument that's hard to ignore. If you had the choice to eliminate suffering for your children or future generations, wouldn't you take it? And if we can create a world where happiness is the baseline, why wouldn't we? This brings us to something called the hedonic treadmill. Have you ever noticed that no matter how much you achieve or acquire, your happiness eventually levels out? That's because your brain has a built-in set point for happiness, and for most of us, it's not very high. Pearce believes we can change this. By editing the genes that control our emotional set points, we can raise the baseline for everyone. Imagine a world where the worst day of your life feels as good as the best day of your life now. It sounds crazy, but the science is there. Of course, transhumanism isn't just about emotions. It's also about extending life, enhancing intelligence, and even merging with technology. But Pearce has a unique take that sets him apart from other transhumanists. While many focus on building artificial intelligence and uploading minds to computers, Pearce believes our future will remain biological, at least for the foreseeable future. Why? Because consciousness, as we discussed earlier, may be tied to quantum processes that can't be replicated in silicon. In other words, no matter how advanced AI gets, it might never truly be alive in the way we are. So what does the future of humanity look like? Pearce envisions a world where we use technology and genetic engineering to create a civilization based on gradients of bliss. That doesn't mean everyone's walking around in a drugged-out stupor. It means we'll still have challenges, goals, and struggles, but they'll be accompanied by a deep sense of purpose and well-being. Think about it: what could humanity achieve if we weren't held back by pain, fear, and misery? Before we move on, let me ask you this: if you could rewrite your own mind, your emotions, your intelligence, even your sense of self, what would you change? And more importantly, how would you decide what to keep? Hold on to that thought, because in the next part, we're taking this to the ultimate level. This is the big one. Everything we've talked about so far has been leading to this paradise engineering. This isn't just about improving humanity. It's about reimagining the entire biosphere, from humans to animals to the tiniest microorganisms. The goal? To end suffering everywhere forever. It's ambitious, controversial, and absolutely mind-blowing. Let's start with the obvious question: why focus on animals? Isn't human suffering enough to tackle? Here's the thing: animals suffer just as much as we do, if not more. Think about the billions of animals in factory farms, living in conditions that are so horrific they make horror movies look tame. Or the wild animals that die slow, agonizing deaths from starvation, disease, or being eaten alive. Pearce argues that if we have the power to prevent this suffering, we have an ethical obligation to do so. One way to start is with something simple: in vitro meat. By creating lab-grown meat, we can eliminate the need for factory farming altogether. But that's just the beginning. Pearce envisions a future where we use genetic engineering to radically transform the natural world. For example, we could tweak predators so they no longer need to kill to survive. Imagine lions that eat lab-grown meat instead of zebras. Some people might argue that this makes nature unnatural. But ask yourself this: is there anything natural about letting animals suffer when we have the power to stop it? Of course, this kind of large-scale intervention comes with risks. What if we accidentally disrupt ecosystems or create new problems we can't foresee? Pearce acknowledges these challenges but believes they're solvable. With tools like CRISPR and advanced AI, we'll soon have the ability to manage entire ecosystems with precision. It's not a question of if we can do it, but when. And here's the kicker: once we've eliminated suffering on Earth, why stop there? Pearce believes we have a responsibility to spread this vision of paradise to the stars. If we ever encounter alien life, our first mission should be to share the technology and knowledge to end suffering everywhere. It's a bold vision, but it raises an incredible question: what kind of civilization do we want to be? One that accepts suffering as inevitable, or one that dares to imagine a better future? So, here's my final challenge to you after everything we've discussed: the quantum mind, transhumanism, paradise engineering. What do you think is possible? More importantly, what kind of world do you want to live in? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because the future isn't just something that happens to us. It's something we create together. Why? The truth is, we're standing on the edge of what might be the most transformative moment in the history of life itself. For the first time, we're not just subject to the blind forces of evolution, we're becoming the architects of our own destiny. That's the core idea behind paradise engineering: the belief that suffering, in all its forms, is optional. And if it's optional, why should we allow it to continue? Let's go even deeper into the practical side of this. David Pearce and others who share this vision talk about using genetic engineering, biotechnology, and even nanotechnology to reprogram the very biology of suffering. Imagine a world where every sentient creature, humans, animals, and even the broader biosphere, lives in a state of what Pearce calls gradients of intelligent bliss. This doesn't mean we'd all be in some mindless euphoria, disconnected from reality. No, it's about engineering a world where well-being is the baseline, where every experience, every moment of existence is rich with meaning, purpose, and joy. But here's the twist. This vision isn't just about eliminating suffering. It's about creating a civilization that's more alive than anything we've ever known. Think about it. Without the mental and emotional baggage of pain, fear, and despair, what could humanity achieve? Would we finally unlock our full creative potential, solve the deepest mysteries of the universe, or even transcend the limits of biology itself? These are the kinds of questions that paradise engineering forces us to confront. Of course, not everyone is on board with this vision. There are plenty of people who argue that suffering is necessary, that it's what makes us human. They say things like, without suffering, how would we grow? How would we appreciate the good times? It's a fair point, but let's break it down. First of all, do you really believe that all the suffering in the world, the pain of losing a loved one, the torment of mental illness, the agony of physical disease, is somehow good for us? Or is that just something we tell ourselves to make it more bearable? Second, what if we could keep the benefits of struggle and growth without the raw, unbearable pain? Pierce's vision doesn't involve turning us into passive, blissed-out creatures with no challenges or ambition. Instead, it's about re-engineering the way we experience life so that even our struggles are accompanied by a foundation of well-being. Imagine a world where failure doesn't crush your spirit, but motivates you to try again, where sadness doesn't spiral into despair, but instead deepens your appreciation for life. That's the kind of future we're talking about, one where growth and happiness go hand in hand. Here's another mind-blowing aspect of paradise engineering: the ethical implications. If we have the power to eliminate suffering, do we have a moral obligation to do it? Pierce argues that we do, and not just for humans. He believes we should extend this vision to every sentient being on the planet. That means rethinking the way we treat animals, not just in factory farms, but in the wild, where suffering is often even more brutal. It's a radical idea, but it forces us to ask some tough questions. For example, is it ethical to let nature continue as it is, knowing that it's full of unnecessary suffering? Or do we have a responsibility to intervene, even if it means reshaping ecosystems in ways that some might find unnatural? And let's not forget the bigger picture. If we succeed in creating a paradise on Earth, what happens next? Do we stop there, or do we take this vision to the stars? Pierce believes that the ultimate goal of any advanced civilization should be to spread well-being throughout the cosmos. That means not just terraforming planets, but paradise forming them, creating worlds where sentient beings can thrive without suffering. It's a mind-boggling concept, but it raises an important question: what kind of legacy do we want to leave behind? Do we want to be remembered as the species that settled for mediocrity, or the one that dared to imagine perfection? Now, let's get real for a moment. This vision isn't going to be easy to achieve. There are massive technical, ethical, and political challenges standing in the way. For one, how do we even begin to reprogram the biosphere? What happens if we get it wrong? And how do we ensure that these technologies aren't abused or used to create new forms of suffering? These are the kinds of questions that philosophers, scientists, and ethicists are grappling with right now. And honestly, we don't have all the answers yet. But here's the thing: just because something is hard doesn't mean it's impossible. Every great achievement in history started as an impossible dream. This one is no different. Before we wrap up, let me leave you with one final thought. Everything we've talked about today, the quantum mind, transhumanism, paradise engineering, it all comes down to one simple idea: the belief that we can do better. Better for ourselves, better for the planet, and better for every sentient being in the universe. It's a vision that challenges us to rethink everything we know about life, consciousness, and morality. And it's a vision that asks us to take responsibility for the future, not just as individuals, but as a species. So, here's my question to you: are you ready to be part of this transformation? Are you ready to imagine a world without suffering and take the first steps toward making it a reality? Because whether you realize it or not, the future is being shaped right now by people like you, who are curious, open-minded, and willing to ask the big questions. Thanks for sticking with me through this entire journey. If you found this video thought-provoking, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's keep this conversation going, because the more people who start thinking about these ideas, the closer we get to turning them into reality. Remember, the future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we create together. Let's make it extraordinary.